as the race for the White House heats up, Joe Biden beginning to draw contrast with his Democratic rivals. The 2020 candidate making his case following a fairly rough debate performance. So for more, let's bring in Kevin Walling, a Democratic strategist and vice president at Hamburger Gibson Creative, where he advises the Democratic National Committee. He joins us now from Washington. Thank you very much for joining us. So, I think the conventional wisdom is that Biden's still the front runner, but a pretty damaged front runner after that debate performance. In your view, does he have what it takes to reset and, strike back, essentially?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question. Thanks for having me on. No question the debate performance was a little rough. Of course, he spent the next day kind of explaining himself in Chicago with Jesse Jackson at that convention, and he's been doing damage control ever since. I know he's sitting down with CNN's Chris Cuomo. They've been teasing that interview tonight, speaking about kind of coming back on the busing issue, more explanation with regards to his civil rights legacy in the Senate and as vice president. But no question, you're seeing his polling take a bit of a dive, too, as Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are kind of inching up on him in these polls that have come out.
Kevin, so when you talk about some of the voters, particularly some of the black voters out there, there does seem to be a divide in terms of generation, with some of the older voters sort of gravitating more towards Biden's style of doing things, and some of the younger voters sort of gravitating more to someone like Kamala Harris. Do you see either one of those candidates being able to sort of bridge that gap between the generations?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's a great point. Joe Biden is still leading among actually older African Americans. If you look at the polling in the critical early state of South Carolina, it's actually older blacks that are really helping him stem the tide in the wake of the debates. They're sticking with him. They're with him when he defended the legacy of Barack Obama with regards to health care, when Senator Harris kind of went on the attack on President Obama's legacy with regards to immigration. He fought back, and you're seeing them stay with him. I think Pete Buttigieg, to your question, is an interesting candidate when it comes to bridging the generational divides. Of course, he's just at 4%, though, so he's got a long way to go to make up that ground. But I think he can be a compelling candidate to kind of bridge that generational gap that you speak about.
Who else do you think is really in a position to rise? Obviously, Kamala's polling looks a lot better. She damaged Biden, but is she in position to capture a lot of those voters, or could they go to a Bernie or a Warren or someone else?
Yeah, it's a great question. To Bernie, he has that locked in 20–25% nationwide that are likely always going to be with him. Maybe Elizabeth Warren pulls a little bit at that, but there's a lot of diehard Bernie support across the country. And of course, he also has the unique benefit of having run 4 years ago, as we know. So he has some organizational support on the ground. I will note that a lot of people I talk to in Iowa on the ground say that Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren are actually building the best on the ground efforts in that critical first state, in terms of not just locking in the best kind of people on the ground, but doing kind of the real work, the house parties, the door-to-door kind of caucusing that you need to do in order to win in a state like Iowa. So I think Cory Booker actually provides an interesting personality in this critical early state for building that organization, and could make up some of that ground as well.
Kevin, at the start of this sort of election cycle, or this campaign cycle, I should say, there was a lot of talk about the Democratic candidates having to veer as far left as possible to sort of win the nomination and potentially beat Trump. But then when you look at the polling, kind of the two top candidates are relatively, I guess, centrist leaning, you can put it that way. And then you have Pete Buttigieg, who had that great showing with regards to his campaign fundraising, who I think also could be put in the centrist camp. As a strategist, do you think the party is going to have to gravitate further left, or can it sort of be sort of the centrist party and win?
Listen, that's a great question. I think, we get so distracted with the Twitter universe and what's out there and how people are commenting online, when we forget that, half of Democratic primary goers consider themselves to be either moderate or conservative. And to your point, Pete Buttigieg has that lane. Joe Biden has that lane. And I think this kind of constant fighting towards the left might not actually be a winning strategy in some of these early states, when you have 20 candidates running and you need maybe 15–20% to be successful ultimately in those early states.
All right, Kevin, thanks. We always love having you on. That's Kevin Walling, Democratic strategist.
Good to be with you.
Absolutely. All right, coming up next, a massive inflection point for the crypto